Okay, so let's take a few questions. Yes, please. And then I'll move to.
Lester, what do you think about the governor's new water action plan? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The question was what I think about the Governor Brown's water action plan. And almost 2 years ago now, the governor's office put together a comprehensive water action plan. Because up to that point, it looked like all the governor was focused on or cared about was building these huge tunnels under the Delta. And a lot of us familiar with this issue is say fixing the Delta is essential, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't solve California's water problems. So the governor put out this plan, and I think if you proceed to implement it, it's one thing to have a plan, it's another thing to actually do it. But if you do that, it's actually very comprehensive and calls for large-scale recycling of our wastewater. So we had a terrible drought last year, and we discharged 1.5 million acre feet of wastewater into the ocean. Why are we doing that? And even when we have these little rains, and even in 2015, hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water ran off into the ocean, off our streets, in contaminated coastal waters. We saw with the mandatory conservation last year, this 25% reduction, how relatively easy it was for people to reduce their water use. So it's all of these things. We've overdrafted our groundwater in the Central Valley. That means that we've pulled the water levels down. I call it deficit spending groundwater. You spend it, you don't replace it. But what that has opened is an opportunity that when you have access to excess water, flood season, recharge it into your groundwater basin so you have it for the next drought. So all of that's in the plan. And if you proceed and implement it, it moves us down this path of resiliency through diversification. And there's a provision in it that calls for better data and water markets to play a bigger role in all of this.
Yes, please. No, you.
Yeah, I totally respect. I actually was born here in the Bay Area, but I grew up in Sacramento, and so I have young kids. And I actually grew up living on the Sacramento levee and seeing that river. And so what I really would like to know is that how can we encourage young children, young people, to really press older people to make sure that we preserve our inheritance? And I'm in finance. I work in investment banking, so I am completely on the capitalist side. But I would really like to know your perspective on how you've communicated to people that are on that side as to how do you make them understand pressing issues that we have and then communicate them to their families. Because I think for me personally, it's the younger generation, and I want to educate my children. I want them to really understand what is at risk.
Correct.
And how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's different efforts out there. There's a nonprofit in California called the Water Education Foundation, and they support something called Project WET, and I think that's water education for teachers. So they prepare materials that make it easy for a teacher to add to their curriculum on water. Where does it come from? How does it get dirty? How do you clean it up? And that type of thing. But there's not enough of that going on. And that kind of education that you're talking about is needed not just for kids. In 2014, California finally passed its first statewide groundwater law. And there's something called the tragedy of the commons. You're probably familiar with that. It influenced me a lot. I think it was a book written by a professor at UC Santa Barbara, if I remember right. But it was based around Puritan New England. When they build these towns, you would have an acre of land in the middle of town. That was the commons, and you could put your cattle on it. As the town grew, everybody put their cattle on it so that it had no value whatsoever anymore. There was hardly any grass. That's what we've done with our groundwater. You could drill a well and you could pump it out. So we actually had to go through an education process with a lot of the pumpers in the valley that were dependent on that groundwater, and find the innovators in the group that were willing to break from the masses to then support finally managing groundwater and manage it more in a sustainable, holistic way.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the, I'm sorry.
And I'll be glad to meet with your kids later.
Go to the next question.
Yeah, Ellen, I'd love to hear you talk about the potential impact of school food as a place, especially for disadvantaged communities, for people to learn healthy or unhealthy eating habits, because that impacts their consumption and preferences going up,
Absolutely,
as adults.
Yeah. Thank you. It's such a great point. And California has really been obviously a pretty big leader. Of course, our heroine, Alice Waters, starting things off. Really, but what's interesting is that we're at this like critical point with everyone recognizing how terrible most school food is and how the system is so unbelievably entrenched, but that the levers for change are actually only relatively recently being pulled. So only until about 8 years ago, it was illegal as a state or as a school district to preference local in your food purchasing. You had to go with the lowest bidder. I mean, that was only changed in a farm bill 2 farm bills ago, which is insane. I mean, we all think that's insane. But that's how late. but think about it. But that's how delayed we are in pulling some of these levers. So one thing that's been frustrating, and it's even been frustrating in California, is that the California School Nutrition Association is like still fighting the whole wheat preference for wheat, 50% of wheat products being whole wheat. They're still fighting that because we are so behind in pushing for some of these changes that it's seeming really fast and furious to the powers that be. That said, there is an unbelievable opportunity, I think, here, I think the only way to describe it is really to get the school districts that currently can make these changes to just make the changes, and then to really be a model for how other school districts can follow along. I know in San Diego, where I live, there's a huge push for California Thursdays, which is actually, I think, across the state, but I know about it mostly in San Diego, which is just like on Thursdays having like one of the food ingredients be from a local farm that you can name. I mean, and literally, I know that sounds crazy, but I think to your point is really important, because I think what people don't realize is really how far we need to go to get to a point where school food is truly healthy. And then the only other thing I would say that's almost like a sort of a consumer part of the agenda is that families who had money for so long or had resources in any way, or had parents who had a little bit more time, for so long have been choosing to not buy school food, that we've almost left the school lunch program to kids who have fewer resources, which is a shame. It's almost like another tragedy of the commons in a way. It's like if everyone, like in France, so if everyone just bought the school lunches would probably be able to improve a lot more rapidly. And so we're in this weird situation where a lot of people who understand how bad it is and have the resources just opt out. And then what's left is the students who have far fewer resources. And then, of course, they're taking wherever we are in sort of the movement to change. But I think in California, that lever is still able to be pulled faster than in other places. And I think as it gets, as years go by and as more parents get involved and as more people recognize how bad it is and as more new school lunch people are coming into the system, it will change, and it will be a very important part of changing the rest of our food system, because it is a major contract for farms and food producers. And if we can get those contracts changed over time, it's going to be a real boon to the healthy food movement.
That's great. Question? Yes, here.
So which of these problems can philanthropic capital uniquely solve rather than commercial capital?
Well, I'll start on that. I mean, I think there's a couple of very specific roles for philanthropy in my mind, and one is moving I'll just take the data system that I talked about, being able to establish a platform. Private capital isn't there because it's not clear how that's going to benefit them, what their rate of return might be. I mean, what we believe is that if you develop this system and it becomes more clear how an impact investor or just an ordinary investor can invest in more efficient water use and be able to market that, you'll bring private capital or impact capital into the space. but it takes some money to do that. You have to develop the system, you have to do some pilot projects, and that's the space that we're in right now is doing that, and I think philanthropy is uniquely suited to that.
I would say, I would add that the one element of the food space that is already a huge philanthropy pool is the hunger space. And that's why I brought that up as a really important element of where investment could be done. Because shifting, I mean, currently a lot of our American hunger system is a great welfare system for massive companies, because you probably give Campbell's soup and Kraft mac and cheese when you go to a food bank. That's a great welfare program for them. It's not that great for the food recipients. And I think that's a really important target that a lot of people that are foodies themselves don't actually remember. That if we can shift the way we give to hungry people, and we can shift some of the way that the resources are allocated there, it's a pretty big opportunity.
So I wouldn't, just to add to that, I wouldn't paint it with a broad brush, but there are aspects of energy where philanthropic capital is very appropriate. But it's not, there's a huge amount of the energy piece where private capital can address it. So it's not exclusive from that point of view, but there are areas, literally geographically as well as from a sector point of view, where philanthropic capital has a role.
You know, I mean, if I could add maybe a little more general answer, I'm new to philanthropy. I mean, this is, 5 years I've been doing this since I left the resources agency. And there's clearly two categories that I see in this water space, natural resource space. One gets referred to as patient philanthropy, where you know you're going to take 5 years of investment to move along the line. And that's there's a number of organizations. If you're familiar with the Energy Foundation, there was patient capital that went into that, and they've achieved very big things. There's a smaller organization that works with ag called Sustainable Conservation, that they go out and develop a relationship with the farmer to get changes going. The other, though, is venture philanthropy, and that is targeting that spot. Maybe it's a data platform of some sort. High risk, high reward, and you get it developed, and you think you're going to launch something that brings private sector capital into that. May not work, but without philanthropic investment, of course it won't work.
Thank you. And we'll have 20 options for philanthropic investment for your review in the next 4 months. Over here, Dan. Yeah.
Just a question on the energy puzzle. If about half of the world now lives in cities, and buildings represent about 40% of the energy that we consume, it seems that in addition to energy storage and alternative sources of energy, that we should be focusing technology on trying to figure out energy efficiency. It appears to be low-hanging fruit. Curious your perspective.
It is very low-hanging fruit, and I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on there. I think lighting is the first example where lighting is not as large as moving water around the world, but is a very large consumer of electricity, and lighting has seen a massive shift in the amount of energy that you use per unit of lighting. So energy efficiency, I think, has been going on, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and a lot of people are excited about it. You're seeing a lot of investment in the space. So I would agree with, and I think you'll see a lot of examples in that space. I think to some extent, transportation, the whole electrification of transportation, is an amazing example of efficiency. People think of it as, okay, you know, it's better and higher performance and all of that, but from an efficiency point of view, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but something as simple as if you were to do something as crazy as take a barrel of oil, use that to generate electricity, and then transmit that and run an electric car based on that barrel of oil versus refining that barrel of oil and then running an internal combustion engine. I think the range of efficiency is somewhere between 4 and 7 times.
Wow.
Literally, I mean, between like the worst example and the best example of that contrast. So there's energy efficiency built into a lot of this exciting stuff that's going on.
Okay, last 2 questions. Yes? Over
Yeah, I
there.
was just going to ask, given that livestock are massively responsible for water usage, what's being done to, thank you, hello, do a number. What's being done to educate people on moving to more of a plant-based diet as opposed to a meat-centric diet?
So it's actually funny. I was literally just going to jump in because I was like, it's so funny we haven't
Lucky
brought
I'm
up this the sort of, dialectic between food and fuel and feed, which is a big sort of buzz phrase in this conversation, which we just didn't bring up yet. And I think it's interesting. Your answer is interesting about not necessarily investing a lot in the sort of biofuel space, probably for efficiency reasons, but it's also kind of not helping some of our bigger meta issues. But I just wanted to, thanks for bringing that up. I know Lester probably has some more specific data on the inefficiency of cow agriculture in that way. But I think it's really important to note that, we've built a system to grow a lot of corn because it was a cheap or subsidized or yield-based metrics efficient food for cows, which are of course incredibly inefficient when you look at the productivity of that bushel of corn and how much food it actually yields. But now of course, because we just came up with another way to use that corn, we've got this whole biofuel system, which is no better for the actual agricultural systems that we've built, especially in the American Midwest, but is also kind of a shame that we're just turning one problem into another, and I think is something that a lot of people don't recognize when they look at biofuels as some sort of an eco alternative. But you were maybe hit on the water thing.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add. I mean, some of this goes to the point that Ellen made earlier, is that we've exported a lot of our food habits, and so we've actually made the consumption of beef and all of these meat products a symbol of success. And so we're seeing China on a rapid increase in the amount of their meat consumption, and it is a sign of affluence and success. And frankly, I don't know how we get our arms around that one, because it's not going in the right direction. I mean, it really is driving a lot of the destruction of the Amazon forest, the soybean production. And we were talking and almost arguing earlier before coming out here just about alfalfa in California, and a lot of it goes in. China sends over a lot of products. You have these empty containers. They fill it with alfalfa and send it back to China. But all of that is based on consumption of dairy products and beef and other meat products. And this gets to the end consumer. And we are starting to see some supply chain folks that want to start changing things a little bit, but that's a tough one. I mean, I've wrestled with cattlemen's associations a number of times in my life, and it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Give some love over here. Last question, actually. So here we go.
Yeah, Lester, you mentioned the Clean Water Act, which was signed by Richard Nixon, and then Devendra, you mentioned sort of the politicization of this issue, and I guess there are places in America where environmentalist is a dirty word, and sort of how did we get to the point where this issue became so politicized, and sort of then how do we move beyond that?
Yeah, how do we?
Exactly.
I'll just make a comment. I don't have an answer to your question. I've never seen a more dysfunctional Congress in all of my years. And when I talk about the Clean Water Act, that was a bipartisan bill. They worked together. There was a whole series of bills that came together. And there was a time when environment and environmental stewardship was a plank in both platforms. And we're so far past that now. I don't know how we get back to it, except, and this was in some of the slides, climate change is so upon us and causing such impacts. I just have to believe one day even Congress is going to wake up. I mean, we have Senator Imhoff walk onto the Senate floor with a snowball, and it snowed in D.C., and therefore there's no such thing as global warming. Seriously? And, it's craziness, but I think the impacts are getting so great, and the weather extremes are increasing, on both sides. Higher flood peaks, worse droughts, that reality has to set in somewhere. But it also takes, I think, grassroots support for organizations that are building momentum to deal with that one day when there's a window open to pass something.
Well, and sorry, just to jump in really quick, because I think it's interesting in the food context, and especially in the system that we're in right now. I mean, the reality is, and I say this all the time, until the Iowa caucuses, where the biggest lobby that people have to pay homage to are the corn farmers, until that is somehow not the first place that our presidential elections are decided, it's going to be very hard for the eater to take precedence in the political dialogue over that corn farmer. And I think, you know, especially in the biofuels conversation, Ted Cruz is the only one who actually said he wasn't so sure that it was a completely efficient thing. That's crazy. I mean, right? I mean, that's crazy. And
I think that's the third time she's told us that's crazy. Love that. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll comment on one aspect. Your original question of you know how this got here, I don't have an answer to that. But I will tell you that over the last few months, as investors, we're noticing that people from groups that you wouldn't expect are beginning to come into the conversation. And the interesting thing is the angle that is appealing to them is innovation and job creation and sort of economic development. And that has always existed, right? I mean, there's lots of data here around, you know, $1 being invested, creating twice the number of jobs and all of that. And I think at the end of the day, people are waking up to that aspect of it. And you know, we say whichever way they get there, as long as they get there, I think is a good thing. But we're starting to see more and more people looking for face-saving ways to get out of some of the mess that they've gotten themselves into.
That's great. So our speakers have agreed to stay around and take some questions if you didn't get your questions answered. But aren't they fabulous? Let's thank them for being here. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you.
That was fun.
All you. So wait just one second. Abby is going to give us the schedule, the dates for what's to come.
Yes, I am. So if you guys haven't picked up our wonderful postcards, Barbie, could you pick one up on the stage? So the next time we're getting together is on May 24th, thank you, on May 24th, where we're going to be bringing you a number of the 20 organizations who are under consideration for your funding. And then on June 1st, we're going to be doing, first ever, something called Battle of the Labs. And this is where I want all of you who have alma maters that you care about deeply in California to think hard. Because what we want to do, and we're already doing it, so come talk to me quickly, is we're reaching out to all of the universities and trying to understand what are the innovations happening at the lab level that really are contributing to this resource revolution. And so what we are planning to bring you on June 1st is basically a showcase of who's doing what in this space. And this is sort of pre-private company stage. This is still in the academia space. So if you are an alumni of somewhere in California that you think has an awesome lab that's doing innovation, let us know. And then allocation night will be on June 9th. And that's where we'll make all of our decisions together. So thank you, first of all, to our awesome panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To my dear colleague Allison for being our moderator this evening. Thank you,
Thank you, Abby.
for contributing to the conversation. And as Allison said, everyone here on stage is going to stay here so you guys can come in and ask questions. And
Thank
thank
all
you
of you for being
for
here.
participating.
Thank you so much.